it doesn't actually matter what your level is. You could impact the business if you figure out the thing, if you spend the time.
This is Lindsey Simon, VP of Engineering at Vercel, and he shares what great software engineering looks like today.
Have you felt FOMO in the last few years?
Yeah, I felt FOMO my whole life. The people who will lead and come up with the innovation tend to be the people building. They're really good at unblocking themselves, and they're really good at unblocking other people proactively. We're all junior engineers again.
Have you felt FOMO in the last few months, in the last few years?
Yeah, I felt FOMO my whole life.
Okay.
I think that part of that is the drive to prove yourself wrong. I have worked in a variety of different environments, tech and not tech, where I felt like the challenge was proving to myself by proving to the people around me that I could do something useful, productive, valuable. Because in my head I'm thinking, I probably can't do that, or I can't hang in that environment. And the only way to find out is to try to do so.
Yeah.
And if you get a hook in for trying, then all of a sudden now you got in, but now it's even worse. Like, shit, I got lucky. In 2006, I interviewed at Google, and I had no expectations. I had no reason to believe I belonged or could get a job there, but I did. For whatever reason, that day I got lucky.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the end of it, right? Then now I'm among this group where I feel very, incompetent. I'm like, what do you do? You can freeze in that moment. You can struggle. But you got to fight.
Yeah.
It
can fuel you.
That's how I've been my whole life.
That's really cool. Looking at our industry, I think agents are shaking up a lot of roles and responsibilities.
Yeah.
Do you foresee any roles just disappearing in the next few years?
I mean, I think I see them consolidating. There are roles that were created as independent roles. I mean, they weren't like ordained from on high. There is the engineering manager, and these are its jobs, and there is the product manager, and these are what they do. I think that there are companies and times when we tried to optimize by, building lanes, and the idea of you could do two things at once meant, well, you had one person doing this job, one person doing this job, and now you're going further together.
Yeah.
I think agents definitely change that, because now you can say, especially finding out where you are less well trained, it's a great place to engage with agents, because they have access to the world of information that you probably haven't read or spent as much time learning about. And, that's a great way to build in that area. So I think engineers, the trend in the Valley right now is that everyone is becoming member of the technical staff.
Yeah, I was thinking the same.
Right? I mean, which tells you that, I think there's two reasons for that. One is kind of an anti-poaching vibe. Like, you don't know what this person does.
Yeah.
We're not going to tell you publicly.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, but internally, they might be a TPM. They might be an EM. But externally, they're just a member of the technical staff. And I think it's twofold. I think it's the anti-poaching piece, but also, there is a flattening of and a subsummation of like responsibilities and ideas. You might not be a designer by trade or training, but that doesn't mean you cannot do design. The act of design is, multiple things.
Have you seen that shift also then in not just from engineers and the capabilities there, but also in hierarchy?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, historically, I think I was nervous about, say, new grads, less experienced engineers joining the company when onboarding was really hard. But, we have interns now who show up at our demo days, which is a Friday. Anyone can sign up and just get in front of the entirety of the engineering team, including the founder, the CTO, the engineering. You could be nervous or you could be excited. And you're all equal in that environment, and I think that's actually one of the things that draws people to tech is the egalitarian, the meritocracy idea that it doesn't actually matter what your level is. You could impact the business, equally as other people if you figure out the thing, if you spend the time. I think that's a very attractive part of technology that will not go away.
For those people then specifically early in career that you've seen excel, what makes them really excel in what they do? Because I also see this narrative of, oh no, woe is the junior people.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm perfectly happy if the rest of the hiring community thinks, oh no, woe is the junior people. I'd be happy to work with them. What I see is that, they're growing up in a builder-minded culture. where, I mean, once you have access to these tools, you're not limited by, oh, I don't know back-end engineering. Well, I mean, you don't, but you have skills, and you can matrix your way, eat the pill, learn kung fu. All of a sudden you have access to knowledge that you don't directly possess, but which you might be able to leverage. And so I think there's less hesitancy for people that don't have the burden of experience and thinking you need this certain kind of expertise to even pretend to do a thing. You can be a lot more bold, like, well, I don't know anything, so I may as well do everything. I think that can be pretty powerful. So I see, college students who've been doing 3 years of hackathons, doing internships at big companies and in tiny startups. And I mean, they're coming out of school very, very well prepared to go work with other people.
Yeah.
Which is quite different than, say, you went to do, very hardcore academics for 4 years, and then you had 2 jobs, 3 years each. Yes, you have 6 years of experience, but that new grad might have 4 years of experience, and it might be more relevant. So I think it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. One of the pieces of advice I got early on in career, it was always to reach out when you're stuck and collaborate.
Yeah.
Because especially in traditional education, you are kind of taught to figure it out yourself, right?
Yep.
Dive deep when you can.
Yep.
Learn, because learning by doing actually makes it distill your knowledge and it anchors it better. But in a business sense, if you're really stuck and you're going to be stuck for weeks, just ask a question if that really helps out. I don't know nowadays what the impact has been on collaboration for people that work with agents, because I can ask you or I can ask my agent.
Yeah.
And it's easier to ask my agent because
Way
then
easier.
It doesn't really look like I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out myself.
No, and I think that's part of it. I mean, when we had our first cohort of interns in the post-GBT era, they onboarded very effectively because they were asking the kinds of questions that, probably weren't the ones you'd ask somebody. You didn't need somebody who had 4 years of deep experience in the code base to answer them. So you could ask, GBT. But and now you're going to figure out, okay, you get good at looking at the responses and going, that response is kind of fuzzy or it looks generic. I think I will take this question to somebody who's got more direct experience. And now that experience is grounded in, you've thought about the problem even a little bit more. You're not just asking because you're stuck.
Yeah.
You're asking because you tried to unblock yourself and you're not satisfied with the answer. That's actually a great point to, and also the people on the other end of that will appreciate it. Hey, you didn't just start by being lazy and asking me. You did your research, you're unsatisfied with the answer, and here's why. That's a
really
much better
fascinating.
way to frame asking for help.
Yeah, that part of being unsatisfied with the answer, that for me is very crucial, because you can take an answer and be like, well, this is the truth.
This is good enough.
Yeah. Or you think and you're like, well, this doesn't really make sense based on what I know or based on conversations
And
I've
that's
had.
among the skills that I think we get better at is really questioning. It's not enough to go, oh, well, this is the answer. It's like, well, why is that the answer? Okay, and you keep kind of going backwards, right? You're digging backwards into really a fundamental understanding. And if you build that fundamental understanding back, you actually really can understand the problem space you're in and be much more effective.
Yeah. I draw the similarity to search, because previously if you find a source, it's like, well, where does the source come from, right? Is it a news tabloid or is it actually truthful information?
My 10-year-old daughter was doing a class on how to evaluate good source information from search.
Yeah.
And I think they're actually teaching this. I mean, that was not a class when I was in school, obviously. But I think that kind of education going back into elementary school tells you that somebody coming out as a new grad probably had some of that kind of experience very early on. So when you say, oh, they have 4 years of college experience, their education experience is entirely different. Being internet native or even AI native, right?
Yeah. And that for me is incredibly crucial, that you still are kind of, you can trust the results, but also just keep thinking and be skeptical as well.
Yeah.
And then validate with your peers, because that's what they're there for.
Yeah. I mean, that's the skill. Learning, the learning of when to push back, when something doesn't feel right. And you only know that by really building an understanding to question things.
How has it been for you? Because I recently spoke to, it was the CTO of Nebius.
Okay.
They are an AI cloud company, actually quite on the forefront. And that person said, well, I'm a manager, right? I'm in leadership team, but I can now build as well.
Yeah.
And he's super enthusiastic about that.
Yeah, I'm enthusiastic too.
Yeah. So are you also now building more and more again?
Yeah.
Yeah. How's that been?
It's amazing. I mean, it's very, we're all junior engineers again. These tools haven't been out for longer than any of us have been in the industry. So, it's that FOMO that we talked about earlier. It's back, but so what do you do with it? Do you kind of hide and you're scared? There's a tendency to do that, but then the only way out is through, right? You have to really come back to it, and I think that's what got all of us into building in the first place, is the art of crafting and building and making things we'd want to use, that we want to share with other people. And so, I mean, that inclination hasn't gone away. I'm more motivated to do it now.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Have you seen a shift in how people want to traverse their career? For me, it was always you go deep in individual contribution, or you kind of go up in the hierarchy, engineering manager, director, CTO, those types of roles?
I mean, I think that, one of the things that we tried to do very concertedly early on is to not equate management with leadership. I find that, that's sort of the default language and taxonomy, but it's not what I'd want as my heart. I didn't never start as going, I want to be a manager.
Yeah, I want to manage people.
Yeah, I don't want to be managed myself. I'm an unmanageable, you don't really want that. You would like to have peers and people with more experience who can guide you and help you find areas you should, see the things you might not see about yourself. I think that's great. But and for us, the IC track and the management track are relatively parallel. The highest level on the IC path is as high as the highest level on the management path. It isn't like you pick one and there's a career ceiling as a consequence. And I don't think that's super novel, but I think it is. We are going to see this break down more, and that's good. The people who will lead and come up with the innovation at the companies that I've worked at tend to be the people building, connected to the iteration cycle, talking to customers. You don't leave that to somebody else. If you're doing all of the jobs, you really can own and excel at something and make it succeed.
Yeah. With now the ingredient that is agents, for me, if you asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said, well, engineering management, like one of those career paths, was definitely something I saw for myself.
Yeah.
But now I got the biggest FOMO, because if I'm not hands-on, I feel like I take myself out of being a daily practitioner, an individual contributor, and things are moving so fast that I'm like, well, I feel like I need to stay here a little bit longer, especially since we're accelerating more and more.
Yeah, there's a push and a pull. I think knowing I didn't end up becoming a manager except to challenge myself to see if I could help scale impact outside of my own contribution ability. For most of my career, my limit was how much PR throughput I could achieve, and add value that way. And so what if you take away your number one lever? Like, that was my lever. And if you take it away, now what can you do? I see that as a different challenge. So in that way, not having that and seeing what else you can do is just another challenge.
Where do you get your fulfillment out of? Because PRs, features, users actually using what you build is very different than, well, now you're in a central role, kind of orchestrating, but people are doing really good. And then is that you, or is that those people? How do you get your fulfillment?
I think in the end, the fulfillment of the mission of a company is what always drives me to get attached in the first place. And if I can continue to feel that, it's not like a multi-day adrenaline rush of landing PRs. It is a little different. It's spaced out longer. Sometimes, but sometimes it feels, when 5 people all feel proud of their work and excited, and you've helped them do it. That feeling of enablement, that's part of the mission. So, even Vercel as a company, its mission is an enablement mission, to enable developers to ship the best products. And so when I see a company building something on the platform that, that's a great idea. I don't think, oh, damn, I wish I'd thought of it. I think, wow, they're building, we helped them do this, and this is incredible. And, you feel pride through that. It is, maybe that's a function of age to some extent, I wouldn't mind getting older and becoming a teacher to help people learn how to learn based on what I've experienced. And I think maybe that fulfillment is a little different. It's a different kind of richness. It's, it's group dynamics. So I get it.
Got it.
I feel it.
How has it been building specifically for the audience that is engineers? I feel like engineers are quite specific with their taste, what they like. If it's shit, they'll tell you.
Absolutely.
Definitely. But also in the last few years, that taste might have changed.
Yeah, it's conveniently, engineers are a fickle lot. And there's not a single answer. In aggregate, you get a lot of signal.
Mm-hmm.
There's the signal you'd get in social platforms, and then there's the signals you get out of telemetry. Not everybody's spending all their day on X telling you their opinions, but they vote with their feet and they vote with what saves them time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that telemetry is extremely valuable. And it's the thing that I'm pretty confident as we continue to push on improving telemetry, you're actually really changing user experience in a super fundamental way. So those two things are both good. I value social evidence, and we read a lot of feedback, harsh and positive, and that incorporates and shapes the feeling of, well, what can we do with that? Could we, if somebody had there's the feedback, you're like, oh man, they're so wrong. No, we didn't do a good job. If they're not wrong, nobody's wrong here. If we think they're wrong, then we didn't communicate it well.
Yeah.
There's something broken that we need to fix. And it's similar to, I used to do a lot of user interface development. And if you sit somebody down to blindly try your web application or your mobile app, and they have a little less context than you do, obviously.
A little, yeah.
Just a little. And now you watch them try to use it. It's such an incredible experience. I mean, usually it is the most motivating thing, because you're like, oh my God, you're seeing it through somebody else's fresh eyes, and you're seeing them frustrated and lose time. And it's the exact opposite of what you'd hoped would happen.
Yeah.
And now you're like motivated. It's like, oh, I could fix this. And then, you're like, stop it. Don't show 5 people this thing. Let me go fix it first.
Yeah.
Because usually they would line up like 5
instantly.
interviews, and you're like, no, I have to fix this now.
Yeah.
And that urgency from feedback that's the dream.
I love the mindset that you say, well, if there is a signal, right, don't just blame, don't just put them in a box, but actually take the feedback and take it to heart and be like, where did this come from? Analyze it, look for its value, and
face
then
the
apply
friction.
it. Yeah.
It's friction. That energy came from somewhere, and it's there.
Yeah. And one of the most fun experiences, you already mentioned it, having people actually go through your application and then not being allowed to say anything or steer is hilarious. It's really funny.
It's knuckle whitening. You're sitting there in the other end, just dying.
Yeah. Have you done that in some of the products right now at Vercel as well?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, we share feedback with a lot of, we'll do just very impromptu feedback sessions, and it's educational. And I think we take a lot of pride in also providing that feedback back to other companies building on the platform. We work with, the slide deck I presented here today was through a partner company that's built on Vercel, and they built a slides product. And so I sent them a ton of feedback about my experience building my slide deck, and that sort of back and forth. And I expect them to give me feedback on the AI primitives on the platform that they're building on. And so, you give and you take in this, and that's pretty magical.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about expectations.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if, from a leadership perspective, expectations for senior staff or people that want to level up in their career on the engineering track have changed. We already talked about kind of being skeptical of the output, trusting your sources, or validating with peers. How have expectations evolved in the last couple of years?
I'm not sure they've changed super meaningfully. I mean, perhaps the baseline for certain things has come up, but I don't think the general expectations are different. Google had this idea baked into the performance ladder of scope of impact, and I've often thought about leveling up in your career as a function of increasing your scope of impact. You have yourself as a really competent IC. There's kind of 2 levels. There's starting and experienced. And then you have the version where, you're a tech lead. You're actually helping delegate and drive work for other people. And you might be new to that, or you might have really started to master that skill. And then there's the version where you're doing that for multiple teams, kind of consulting as an Uber tech lead or as a multi-team tech lead. And there's, newer to that role, and then there's very experienced at it. And then there's, doing that at the entire company level. And then there's doing it at the industry level. And I actually think that maps pretty well to most of the levels in most career guidelines. So I'm not sure it's changed too much there. Success might look different in terms of, speed, expectations and things like that, because we do know that the act of coding can be done much more quickly. with agents. So that may be different.
Gotcha.
Something that, again, Claude tells you it'll take a month and it takes 2 hours, maybe one. So, it's even bad at its own expectations management of time. So I think that is not such a, that example comes from, well, it's trained on, probably Jira and the flow of like tickets that it has access to and what it expects it would take. And then in reality, it takes, a 50th of that time. Well, I think the expectation is some things might take a 50th of that time, not all things.
If I were to say, think of the best engineers that are kind of in your work environment, there's probably a few names that pop out.
Sure.
What do they do that you really appreciate about them in their way of working or the impact they bring to the table?
Yeah, they unblock themselves. They're really good at unblocking themselves, and they're really good at unblocking other people proactively. They're in touch with the kinds of communications that are happening in the company. They're reading and they're writing, but they're helping.
Yeah.
And then that help usually causes them to systematize their help. So, that's a way to scale how you impact. If you figure out how to systematize helping 2 people directly and you leave a breadcrumb behind that'll help the next 10 people, that's a serious, that's the kind of activity that happens at more experienced levels. I see that.
Do you have an example of what that systematication looks like?
Yeah, I mean, an easy one is that you might, have years of experience building interfaces, and, Xu Ding, who works at Vercel, he wrote one of the first skills that we started to think about, how should we distribute this more broadly? It was his best practices for React applications built from years and years of experience, debugging and fixing async problems with fetches, instant mutations in clients and on servers, and codifying that into a skill, and then us distributing it. We've given you Xu Ding, and Xu Ding has changed his impact scope way beyond industry level. And I think things like that, the ecosystem for sharing reusable skills and plugins, I think is a good example there.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example.
Yeah,
definitely. I feel like education is also kind of shifting, and people definitely, when new things come out and the market, you also see it, but from a marketing side, but also from a content creation side. Right now we're at a conference, Tech Lead conference.
Yeah.
What do you appreciate about conference environments, and then this one specifically?
Yeah, I mean, the conversations are a higher fidelity than anything, and people open up more personally in person, for sure. You're kind of more aware of your blast radius, and therefore you kind of open up in a different way. Seeing people at very different stages of their experience level. Some people very hungry and a little scared. Some people very experienced and scared based on the state of things. But usually they're here at all. It means they want to learn more. This tends to foster an environment of self-learners and people trying to get better for the sake of humanity, I think. That's pretty inspiring.
Absolutely. Have you seen any pattern in kind of the appetite for topics that people are talking about or asking about?
I mean, the one that's pretty fun that I noticed on our panel, I mean, my talk was the first one of the day, so I hadn't seen the other ones, but the idea of people kind of going back to the fundamentals of how to learn effectively, I think is really exciting, because it invites us to go back to sort of the stages. For me, I've been in industry for a while, and going back to, okay, that's built on a education where I learned how to learned how to write by doing it over and over again and critiquing the hell out of it. And we still do that in the industry, but what can you take as principles that you can apply to this time from something you might have done much earlier in your life? And I think finding those gaps where, okay, well, I got through this class and I got a B. It's clearly not as good as you could have done. Or maybe you got an A, but along the way, you passed something, you got an 85 on a test. I think the model today would be go back, and not just today. This is always the case for what effective thinking meant. Go back and really get yourself to 100% understanding, and then move forward, and you won't have these gaps that sort of grow and create splinters and a different kind of FOMO that is legit.
Yeah.
If you close those gaps, you have this opportunity to figure out for yourself how to build on stronger foundations, and that helps you to think more clearly, and then move more quickly.
Yeah, I really had to learn that by doing, because
Yeah, I think so.
kind of moved into a software engineering role, and then I learned to be effective.
Yeah.
But then I wasn't as fast as my peers, or things just took longer than I initially had thought. And that was the underlying foundations that I still had to catch up on or kind of refresh. And because things are accelerating now, I love this narrative or this signal of let's learn how to learn from a fundamental standpoint.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, there was always this concept of, well, should you drop out of school and just start a company? Do you have to study computer science for 4 years to even get a job in the industry? I think there should be a resurgence of liberal arts education for everybody. If English is the most important programming language, you better learn how to write effectively. Distilling information is a practiced art.
Yeah.
And then communicating concisely and with measurements, and I think a lot of this applies to using AI effectively, because you can burn a lot of tokens to get there along the way, and again, that's more slow, and that isn't what you're trying to do.
No, the distilling of information, I never thought about it, but it's something that we always did with all the various sources of content that we have now.
Yeah.
But especially if we go to more leveraging one source, that is AI, models, agents, the context is huge. And then it's up for you to condense it and be like, this is the essence, and communicate that. Yeah.
I think that's one of the attractive things to people in our industry, is that symbolic logic can be a very concise way to represent pattern matching. I mean, I was fascinated by regular expressions early on because they're so powerful in so few characters. Now, you could argue that they're not very readable, but in fact, if you learn how to read it, it's very readable. So I think that a lot of things kind of fall from that.
Yeah. Before we round off, I want you to share one takeaway that has helped you within your career that might be relevant for the people trying to level up.
Yeah. I think this comes back to feedback. Don't be afraid to get feedback really early, and continue to do it. You don't want to go into the cave. I'm going to use a Socratic analogy. You don't want to disappear into the cave thinking you're going to come out with, an earth-changing thing. The way that all great practitioners have developed is by constantly getting feedback from more people and learning how to distill that signal. So, get out there, share your things. I mean, for me, writing was the most important piece of advice I ever got, was start to learn how to write about the things you're doing. Because that forces you to turn, experiments into concise descriptions. And that's actually very interesting to other people. And so, get out there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, Lindsey.
Yeah,
this is great.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.